Do you miss her?
Who?
Nicola Sturgeon.
Nicola Sturgeon? No, not really. Not really, no. I mean, do you mean personally or
Well, yeah, or
professionally?
both. Do you think that you and your
Yes, in the sense that clearly there's stuff going on for her just now. But no, I've no doubt that she'll still have a part to play in future years, and I also think it's actually quite healthy because I'm a big believer in politics should be about policy as opposed to personality.
So, Mhairi Black, welcome to your exit interview, a chance for us to both learn what you could have done better. Let's start with the obvious question. Why are you leaving us?
Oh God, folk will be fed up of me answering this question. I think a lot of it ultimately comes down to the culture of Westminster and the I suppose the pressures and the setup of it. I don't think it's, well, certainly for me anyway, it's not sustainable to spend the rest of my life in it. And I've always said that that was never my intention, and I never set out to have a long career in politics. So it felt like the right time for me to sort of wind that elected side up.
Let's rewind back to the beginning then, as to how you ended up in the House of Commons at the first place, because it was in that extraordinary moment in 2015 when the SNP sort of swept the board. You were, I remember the first time I met you. You were what, 20? Were you 20 when you were elected at that point? And you hadn't actually finished your degree either. So how on earth did that happen?
So I still had a politics exam to sit, which was ironic after winning an election. No, so how it came about for me certainly was the referendum. That was when SNP won the 2011 election and announced that they were going to hold a referendum. I just thought, right, this is the time to get involved. And it was myself and my dad we really got heavily involved in it, just campaigning, knocking on doors, talking to people on high streets, arguing with taxi drivers, everything you could imagine. So when we lost the referendum, there was that feeling of, I'm not just going back in my box here, let's keep the pressure on, let's hold them to account for all the things that we were promised. And folk kept saying to me, you should put your name forward. And I was like, don't be stupid, that's a ridiculous idea. But the more I argued it out with people, the more I realised that I was losing the argument. So I was selected to be the candidate, and the rest is history.
But it's interesting that, though, because some people would think, A, you were really young, B, that your aim in pursuing Scottish independence is because you think Scotland should, go it alone, cut ties with Westminster, and instead you sort of did the opposite. You threw yourself into Westminster, and you were studying politics anyway. Why go for Westminster and not stand for Holyrood or for a council or something that would have kept you closer to the action in Scotland?
Well, two things. The first is mainly because Westminster's where the life-changing decisions are made. And, don't get me wrong, the devolved parliaments can do a hell of a lot, and I think that's something that I've argued before. I think the Scottish Parliament, certainly in the last 10, 15 years, has done an awful lot in the areas where it can do things. But if you want to fundamentally change the way our society functions and I suppose the barriers that are put up for people in society, then all that lies with Westminster. And the second reason why it was there was also the timing of it, because we'd lost the referendum in September and the next election was May and the general election. So, like I say, it was very much a campaign of let's hold them to account, let's make them work for this. Gone are the days where we can just take for granted what Scotland's going to vote, and to me that's a healthy thing. So that's how I ended up there.
That's how you ended up there. And it's fair to say that almost from the moment you arrived in Westminster, there was a massive culture shock, culture clash, maybe, and you got quite a lot of grief for that at the time.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I couldn't do wrong, or I couldn't do right for doing wrong. It was, yeah. The attention on me was something that, in hindsight, I kind of think maybe naively I didn't expect it. But because my head was so wrapped up in what we were arguing for and what our policies were, that I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking of the novelty of me getting elected, if that makes sense.
It's weird. I mean, this is a terrible thing, but I know it's because you tweeted a photo of it really early on. Even if I see you in the news now, I think about
Yeah.
chips. Because you, and I mean that in the nicest possible way.
Yep.
But it was like the biggest story in Westminster
Do you know,
politics was you had some
I,
chips.
I was raging at that because I'd sat down for my lunch and it wasn't me that actually tweeted it. It was my colleague Anne McLaughlin. She sat at the table with me and went, "Oh, I'm taking a photo of that." And I was like, "Aye, all right, cool, take a picture." I didn't realise she was going to post it. So then next thing she did post it and woof, all the newspapers went in and it got spread everywhere that I'm having chips.
Do you think that was because of your background, because you were young, because you were a woman, because you were in the SNP, a mixture of all of those things? That sort of anything you said or
Yes.
did, got leapt on?
Yes, that's certainly how it felt anyway. Um, you know, it was like I remember thinking at the time when folk were saying, the responsibility of this, how are you going to cope with it? And I remember thinking, look, if I was if I'd become a teacher, I still wouldn't be able to, have insane nights out or be dancing on tables or, doing all these extravagant, wild things. So it's kind of the same in that sense. But what was different was the intensity of the sort of scrutiny, and as well, it wasn't scrutiny of my arguments or what I was saying. A lot of it was scrutiny of what people perceived me to be, which was quite difficult to grapple with because I got into this just to argue about the politics, and then all of a sudden my entire character's getting drawn into things whether I like it or not. So that was a steep learning curve, definitely.
I mean, let's focus on some of the positive things that happened when you first arrived. Your maiden speech just
Yeah.
blew up, like 10 million views online in a couple of days.
Yep.
That's quite a thing to go from, I got a bit involved in the independence campaign to suddenly like everyone
Yeah.
knows who you are. Do you think that was, the power of social media to do that, actually probably brings more people into politics than would have done otherwise? But what was that like for you when you, because for any new MP, your maiden speech is a big deal, but obviously when suddenly it has been viewed 10 million times, that's an even bigger deal.
See, I'm still not convinced that out of that 10 million, I think at least 5 million were my mum just repeating it. Eh, no, it was incredible, the response. Because, so we get elected in May, and I did my maiden speech, I think it was July. I was one of the last to do my maiden speech, and that was deliberate on my part because, first of all, I wanted a little bit of time to sort of suss the place out a little bit and figure out how things work. But there was also an element of me where it was almost like I was in such demand from everybody that I wanted to have a wee bit of control and saying, no, I'm going to settle in, find my feet, and I'll talk when I'm ready to talk. So that's exactly what I did, and I think I made the right decision. But in doing that, I think it also kind of it created a sort of whirlwind around it. I remember somebody coming in and telling me, "You're trending first in Nigeria." I was like, "What?" It's just mental.
Let's talk a bit about the culture overall of Westminster, because you've criticised it a lot. For people who don't know, maybe they've never, lots of people haven't been to Parliament. What is it like as a workplace to try and get your head around? Because you've been pretty scathing about it in the past.
Yeah, it's a shame because I genuinely don't try to be. It's just my experience of it is such a world unto itself. It's it's a stunning place to be. It's a historical institution. It's a stunning building, the architecture and, just the history and the corridors. And all that's really true and nice and valuable. But where I've got a problem with that is when it starts getting in the way of things functioning. And Parliament seems to, at every turn, do everything it can to maintain this sort of closed club feel to it, rather than it being an open, functioning democracy that's embracing the modern age. And even during COVID, I think we've seen that. From 2015, we were always told, oh, we can't modernise Parliament, it's too complicated, we won't be able to do it, it'll cost too much money. And then, of course, COVID happened, and overnight, we've suddenly got the ability to have a hybrid Parliament. And, of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg just ripped that out the minute that COVID was done, purely because he hates technology. But that was enabling so many members to actually participate in Parliament where otherwise they wouldn't have been able to. So rather than nurturing that, they just ripped it all out again, despite the millions spent on it, which just doesn't make sense.
Let's talk about, as part of your exit interview, some of your bosses, and we'll get your assessment of the various bosses you've had. When you first arrived, Angus Robertson was your leader in Westminster. Sum up Angus Robertson in a word.
In a word, showman.
Showman.
I think. Yeah, he's very good at being the centre of any party. He's good at that.
Very good. He was then also replaced by Ian Blackford. Sum up Ian Blackford in a word for us.
See the irony of you asking me to sum up a man who could talk for hours in one word. I would say consistent.
Okay. In fact, because we actually did an exit interview with Ian last year, and he struggled with some things up in a single word. And your current boss of Westminster, Stephen Flynn, sum up him in a word.
Baldy.
Baldy, fine. That's good. We'll take that. And obviously, in the dual world of being an SNP MP in Westminster, you've had other leaders in Scotland.
Yep.
Sum up Nicola Sturgeon in a word.
Impressive, I think. I've every time that I've seen her in action, I've thought, I can't think of many folk who can perform better than she can, particularly under intense scrutiny.
If I'd said to you at the beginning of 2023 that by the time we got to the end of 2023, Nicola Sturgeon would be gone, the polls would have been massively shifting, would you have believed that?
Honestly, it probably wouldn't make any difference. Now, I'm saying this because I genuinely have always thought you can't predict what's going to happen beyond, you're lucky if you can predict 6 months out. Because if you look at it that way, I was never expected to be elected, and then I did. Brexit was never supposed to happen, and then it did. We've had umpteen elections where it's been expected that the SNP is going to get an absolute kicking, and yet we're still there. So honestly, I if you told me we were going to have 4 prime ministers within the period of one parliamentary term, so when I'm saying I probably would have believed you, not because I think it was obvious things were pointing that direction, but just because I think politics in Britain is just so wild just now. I've given up trying to predict.
Do you miss her?
Who?
Nicola Sturgeon.
Nicola Sturgeon? No, not really. Not really, no. I mean, do you mean personally or professionally?
Or both. Do you think that you and your... I mean, I don't know how close you were, if you miss her personally, but also, is she missed by the cause?
Yes, in the sense that clearly there's stuff going on for her just now.
Yeah.
But no, I've no doubt that she'll still have a part to play in future years, and I also think it's actually quite healthy because I'm a big believer in politics should be about policy as opposed to personality. So in some respects, I think it it's just a natural, healthy progression for somebody else to come in and to, you know, try and punt the same ideas and things, because ultimately that's what it should be about, as opposed to, like I say, any one person.
It's interesting because some people have said that the SNP had become a bit of a personality cult. The fact that that Nicola was the leader, her husband was the chief executive.
Yep.
It was too. Would you go that far? Was it a problem that the SNP was the Nicola Sturgeon party?
For me personally, yes, it always made me quite uncomfortable. But as I say, I do think she's certainly one of the best, if not the best, performing politicians that I've seen. I've rarely seen anybody get the better of Nicola Sturgeon. So in that sense, of course, she's a massive asset to have. But yes, I remember, and did always feel a wee bit uncomfortable with, we shouldn't be relying on, one face or one person. It should be about the movement. It should be about the the vision of what we want to see change and what we want to happen. So there's a balance to be struck, and I'm not convinced that we always got the balance right.
And obviously, there's an ongoing police investigation. She's been interviewed by the police, but released without charge, as have Peter Mole and others. But overall, have you been surprised by? I mean, I was going to say, have you been surprised by the police being called in to look at the finances of your party? Mm-hmm. I assume the answer to that is yes. But what's your? Maybe you're not. Maybe you're not. Has it shocked you what's played out this year?
Yes, and just as you say, I don't think any political party ever wants the police, having a look about, because, of course, the optics of that are terrible. In terms of the SNP as an organisation, I've always had my issues with how it's sort of run, or how decisions have been arrived at and things. So I would say yes. I was aware that there's things I don't think that's right, but of course you've got a full-time job in front of you, so it's kind of, you try and influence things when you can. But yes, it was a surprise. It's not a good kind to find that your party's getting investigated.
Which actually brings us on to Nicola Sturgeon's replacement, Humza Yousaf, who I think at one point said this year, "It's always a surprise when one of my colleagues is arrested," which is one of the political quotes of the year for me. Sum up Humza Yousaf in a word.
I would say caring.
Interesting. Tell me why that is.
Caring, because so having known him, I think he's he's genuinely a warm person, and if there's ever the minute he's aware that something's not okay or that someone's not okay, that's the first person he'll phone. And I don't know that every political leader in the UK could say that. So yeah, I'd go with that. I think he's got genuine heart in him.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting. And it's good to get that sort of human perspective. Given what has happened this year, then, given that both Nicola Sturgeon's departure clearly removes one of the big players of the SNP, and what has played out with the police investigation and so on has clearly changed some people's views. The Labour Party looks like it's coming back in a way that it hasn't done for a long time. Is the dream of independence further away now than it was 12 months ago?
No, I don't think so. And the reason I say that is because the support for independence is holding steady, and even the latest polls had it rising again a little. But for me, the thing that's fundamentally where we are so much closer than we were even in 2014 is independence is now a mainstream point of view. It's particularly in Scotland, if not in the whole of the UK. That was fantasy in 2012. It was seen as just being this silly little fringe idea that we have to just go through the motions with. But all of a sudden, no, we've actually brought it onto the agenda, and it's stayed on the agenda for quite some time. So we've got generations growing up that see independence as being a normal idea as opposed to it being this big scary thing that it was in 2014. So in that sense, I've no doubt that Scotland is definitely going to be independent. It's just a case of when and how we get our independence. But in terms of the dial shifting, no, I think we're closer than we were.
That's interesting. That. Well, I've got some classic exit interview questions for you now, Mhairi. Do you think we equipped you properly to handle your job?
What, as in the Times?
No, not me personally. Do we as a country equip our politicians to be able to do their job?
Well, in a lot of respects, I don't think it is your job to equip politicians.
Interesting.
Where I think things have started to improve and should have improved is certainly how Parliament equips its new MPs. Because when I think back, it was pretty much, you get handed a parliamentary iPad and sent on your way kind of thing. And I'm very glad I handed it right back, Matt, let me tell you. So I do think that there's been a learning curve there for Westminster, certainly. But no, I don't think it's the job of, society to equip its politicians. If anything, it's the job of society, or it should be the job of society, to better pick their candidates and their politicians. But that's a whole other can of worms.
Well, I was going to say, what do you think are the skills and qualifications that your replacement needs to have?
Resilience is the first one. I think it's funny because I think anyone who's, and I use air quotations here, but anyone who's normal who goes into Parliament, I think is going to get a shock, no matter where you're from, because it's such an alien existence that you have to be able to adapt and, as I say, be resilient to at least some extent to be able to survive.
And how many? I mean, obviously you consider yourself normal. How many normal MPs do you think there are?
See, when they first go in, I think there's quite a lot. But by the time the first term's over, the number drastically reduces. And again, that kind of comes back to my issue with Parliament, is I do think that there comes a point where if that existence in that building is the majority of your life, then you're not normal anymore. And you start losing touch with reality and with what everyday people are experiencing and living through and what they think. And instead I think it can change people a lot, whether that be in terms of their own health or their own mental health, or equally their personalities can change. I've seen folk who you would have thought would have been the first one marching to the border with a claymore, but now absolutely love being in London. You think, I wouldn't have expected that.
Some of your SNP colleagues actually quite like being part of the Westminster bubble?
I will not specify if they are current or not, but yes, I've come across ones where I've thought, you're, slightly, or you appear slightly more comfortable than I think you should be.
You've previously talked about Westminster being outdated, sexist and toxic. What did you dislike most about it?
It's got to be the voting system. It's got to be. I think the whole lining up in a lobby and going through one by one and them locking the doors, and then if you don't get out the lobby, you get chased by the guy with the sword, and all of this is just nonsense. Like, I remember during Brexit, there was one night where the Scottish Parliament, where they had the same number of votes, and it was something like, let's call it 10 votes or something, and the Scottish Parliament did it in 6 minutes, and we spent 4.5 hours on the same number of votes. And it's literally just doing laps of that bloody chamber, and you think, we could get so much more done in this time, but instead I'm cramped up.
Do you think it even affects mindset? You said it, people change, their personalities change. But if you're walking through the lobbies and, I don't know, voting on, maybe it's the budget, or, you're supposed to be thinking about your constituents and the world that they live in. But obviously, you know, is it possible for you to simultaneously think about your constituency while being chased around in a big circle by a man with a sword?
Well, you see, that's it. That's the problem. And as well, because things in Westminster happen so fast and things can change, within an hour, you will often find, like, whenever there are votes, there's whips standing at the lobby doors, making sure you're going into the right lobby. And I used to think, how the hell can you not know what you're voting on? Like, you're making laws. How are you not paying attention? But within a first year there, you realise, oh, it's nearly impossible to keep up with everything that's coming constantly. You think you're going down to debate one thing, oh no, an hour before it starts, the government's decided to pull that and they've put something else in, and yeah, it's probably that, I would say.
So putting all that together then, you've lasted, 8 years? It'll be probably 9 years by the time the election comes around.
Yep.
It doesn't sound like you loved much of it. Would you recommend it to someone else?
See, I always give the same answer when I'm asked this, whether it's adults or in schools or whatever. I think, see if you think that you've got something that needs to be said, or you think that you've got a skill that and a desire to change things, then go for it. But I want people to know what the reality's like, because I don't want the thought of, say, another 20-year-old coming into Parliament and expecting that it's all going to be really nice. I think I would feel I was doing a disservice if I wasn't telling the truth about the place. And that's where I start to feel quite awkward sometimes, is because, like, everything you've read out, I tell you what I really think, It's not like I leave any ambiguity, but that's the reality of what the place is like. Although I think it's important that folk know that reality, I also think it's never going to change unless we get different people in there. So yes, I would encourage folk to do it.
Do you regret going into the Commons when you were so young? Would it have been better for you and for the Commons if you'd been 10, 20 years older?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Well, firstly, I don't regret anything really over the last. I'm going to be 30 next year, and I was elected when I was 20. So, say, call it a nice 10 years, right? I think I also think for Parliament to be genuinely representative, it has to look like society, and that's been one of the big problems with Westminster, is it's disproportionately filled with a certain type of person. So no, I don't regret being 20 when I got elected, because if anything, it allowed me to share a point of view that I know most of my peers would share. And of course, my peers are the ones that are now struggling to get houses, struggling to keep work, or having to leave Britain altogether in order to find good work. So, yeah, no, I think I meant it in 2015, and I still mean it now, where I don't think age is such an important factor as people, make it.
So finally then, the obvious question at the end of an exit interview, what are you going to do next?
And genuinely not got a clue. Well, a couple of things. So the first thing I want to do is take a bit of time just to breathe a little bit, and come back down to earth. But what I've realised that I really do enjoy is I love creating, and I love writing, and I love communicating. So I'm kind of just looking for what opportunities present themselves. But like I keep saying to folk, it's really weird though that I don't know when I'm going to stop being an MP. So like I'm still in a full-time job just now. Yeah, it's not like there's a purgatory period just because you've said you're not standing again. So once we know when the election is, I think I'll have much more of a realistic opportunity to assess, the opportunities that have presented themselves, and hopefully will still.
Let's end on an upbeat note. What's the one thing you'll miss about Westminster? Is there anything?
Oh, the staff.
The staff?
No, there is the
Okay.
staff. Aye, the staff are the ones that keep my sanity at bay. It's sneaking out for a ciggy with the cleaners and stuff. That's where you get the gossip. So,
Well, the truth is, you felt more comfortable with the staff than you did most of your colleagues on the green benches, didn't you? Because of your background and
oh,
your
totally,
age and, yeah.
absolutely. And they're also, I think, again, because Westminster and Parliament functions on such a hierarchy basis, it felt good to be with what I considered normal people, which is, to be frank, the folk that are considered usually the bottom of the rung in Westminster, as I just thought, oh, you're speaking my language, you're on my wavelength, you're right, he is mental, it's that kind of thing.
Well, here's to more normal people in politics. Mhairi Black, thank you for joining us for your exit interview. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.